Hello and welcome to Chopper's Brexit Podcast. I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent. Now, before we start, a word of warning. During this podcast, a lot of news has happened and we record our guests in a different order and then reshape it in the final edit. So in some of the interviews, we know a bit more about the deal than in others. Anyway, on with the programme. Now, where were you when the deal was done? After 3.5 years of negotiations, Boris Johnson confirmed the deal was done to take Britain out of the European Union on Thursday, October the 17th. Well, I was here in the Red Lion pub, and in fact, you'll hear the moment it happened live on this podcast with a tweet from Jean-Claude Juncker's Twitter account. It really is a modern world, and that happened during an interview with my main guest this week, Robert Jenrick, the Housing Secretary. So it really is all systems go on Brexit. Boris Johnson is right now in Brussels talking to EU leaders about trying to get his deal over the line. And back here in Westminster, MPs are on a 3-line whip to vote on whether to have a sitting this Saturday to approve Boris Johnson's deal. That sitting, if it goes ahead, will be the 4th time since the Second World War when MPs have sat on a Saturday. So, loads to discuss. This week on the podcast, I'm joined by Raoul Ruparel, a former Brexit advisor to Theresa May, and he has first-hand experience of dealing with the DUP, the crucial MPs who are important to get this deal over the line. And I'll be sitting down with Brexit Party MEP and Chairman of Leave Means Leave, John Longworth, and he's telling me why it's really vital for businesses that we get this deal done, because Britain is an immense global power, and it's time it started to behave like one. And in the wake of the Queen's speech this week, in which the Queen set out Boris Johnson's plans for government, I'm joined by former Lib Dem MP Norman Baker, who's written a book about the politics of the royal family. But first up, with Brexit news breaking during this podcast, I'm joined by Robert Jenrick, who was the youngest minister to serve in Theresa May's government. He was first elected as an MP in 2014 and has been Housing Secretary under Boris Johnson since July. Robert Jenrick, welcome to Chopper's Brexit Podcast.
Thank you. Good to be back.
I do appreciate you coming on. I know there's a running 3-line whip in House of Commons and you've risked your life and limb to be
risked
here.
my career to be on your programme.
But it's a sacrifice well made. Thank you. It's Thursday morning. We think we know what the deal looks like. As things stand, is the deal Brexit?
I think it is. I mean, of course, there's going to be more negotiations. As we're speaking now, we know that there's more work to be done to get our friends in the DUP to agree to the arrangements. But the deal as we know it is definitely Brexit. You know, this enables us to take back control of our borders, our laws. It enables us to do free trade deals around the world. It enables the whole United Kingdom as one to leave the customs territory of the European Union, incredibly important. But it does also compromise and answer the legitimate concerns of the Republic of Ireland and many in Northern Ireland, that there's no hard border and infrastructure around the border. And that's important. But, you know, we need our pragmatism and compromise to be matched, I think, in the final days and hours by the EU. But
we're still
and
paying
other partners.
We're still paying a bill to leave, and we're still subject to the ECJ jurisdiction, according to the reports, aren't we?
Well, look, we're going to have to wait to see exactly what the final details are, but it is not our intention that we're subject to the European Court of Justice there, but we're going to be obviously hammering out the final details in the next few hours. But look, I sincerely hope that we get this done. As you say, I've really only known Parliament debating Brexit in my time here. So
since 2014, it's been...
Yeah, I had a brief period of sort of normality.
I know.
And then we had the referendum and 3 prime ministers, 2 general elections.
For 3 weeks.
Exactly.
I put it down to Brexit.
I mean, the country is crying out to move on.
Yeah.
And, you know, someone like me who didn't come into politics to talk about Europe, but, you know, just much more motivated by other issues, and now in such an important area as housing, we want to get Brexit done so we can start talking about these things.
We'll come on to housing, and forgive me for staying on Brexit for a second, but do you think Brexit is driving people a bit mad? I think we're getting over-obsessed about a row about trading rules, essentially, and maybe immigration, but that's about it.
Well, I can certainly point to some people who've been driven mad by Brexit.
Friends of yours?
I think people on both sides of the debate. But I think the feeling in the country, as I see it, and I represent admittedly an area that voted very heavily for Brexit in the Northern Midlands, but the people I speak to, and I think it's true of your readers, want this to be over now. Whether they voted for Brexit or they didn't,
There's more that unites you with Philip Hammond, isn't there? For example, your old boss at the Treasury. There's more that unites you two.
I enjoyed working with Philip. We agreed in, low taxes, small state, trying to
that's the core Tory
help business people, entrepreneurs to succeed. We want to get back to that. And we're only going to do that if we can get this over the line.
And Boris Johnson is really the guy who can do that, because the first line of his obituary is the vote leave bus, isn't it? I mean, now it'll be being Prime Minister, but he's personally invested in it in a way Theresa May wasn't.
I think that's right. I mean, I was the 20th person to come out and MP to come out and support him.
Yes,
so, from the beginning, I felt that he was the person who was able to bring the country together and get a Brexit deal over the line, because, as you say, he has credibility on Brexit. He led the campaign. He cares about this. He wants to deliver it.
Yeah.
And all credit to him, actually. There were many people just a few weeks ago who were saying that he wasn't serious about doing a deal. It was all a charade. We were just heading for no deal. Actually, you've seen that hard work has paid off.
It still happen this month, no deal, couldn't it?
It could do, and we're still working on that. I mean, yesterday, Michael Gove and I were meeting the local council leaders in Kent, trying to tackle issues of the roads and the boards and so on. Look, we are leaving on the 31st of October, with or without a deal, but let's try and get this deal over the line.
Should we fear no deal?
I don't fear no deal. Of course, it's not been my preference throughout this process, but I've always fundamentally believed that this is a very strong country with a great economy, things that people all over the world admire about the United Kingdom, and that we'll be fine either way.
We start celebrating Brexit.
Well, I hope we will be celebrating it on the 31st of October.
Will you be celebrating
it? I certainly will be, yeah. And maybe I'll be, enjoying some of those Brexit coins that you and I worked on for a couple of years.
Well, they're coming soon. I think they're going to be minted soon.
I hope so. Well, I've never done an interview without you mentioning them.
No,
so.
Well, these are for listeners.
I'm amazed that we've got this far.
Well, I'm just being very sticking to the scripts here, Robert. But for listeners not unaware, these are 50p coins that you championed in the Treasury.
Well, it was your idea.
It was my idea via Tory MP. But let's keep anyone listen to this podcast. No, let's keep that quiet. You mentioned optimism there, and housing is one of the key things I think you can reach out to younger generations to vote Tory. You're getting there slowly, aren't you? It's like turning a big tank around and getting those numbers up. But you're getting there, aren't you?
We are, but there's a long way to go. I mean, this year, I think there'll be more homes built in this country, bar 1 year, of any year in my adult lifetime. So there's a big improvement. Almost a quarter of 1 million new homes will be built. Big step forwards, but there's a long way to go. I mean, I want to be the housing secretary that renews the dream of home ownership for my generation and for the next, because I've always believed that owning a home is about more than just four walls and a roof. It's a stake in society. It's about putting down roots in a community, investing in your future. It's something you can borrow against to set up a business. And
it's a supply issue, though, isn't it?
It is a supply. It's fundamentally a supply side challenge. That's the way I view it. And so I'm setting out not only to create new routes to home ownership, like through shared ownership, for example, but also to reform the planning system, which is, so complicated and convoluted. It's more difficult to understand than Emily Thornberry trying to explain Labour's Brexit position. It's a product of our post-war settlement, and we need to change that now. Yeah. So we're going to be bringing forward a whole raft of reforms and freedoms in the weeks and months to come. We've already started with the freedom for anyone to build upwards in their home, which will enable you to grow your house as your family grows too.
Just while we've been recording this, Jean-Claude Juncker has tweeted that where there's a will, there's a deal. We have one. It's a fair and balanced agreement for UK and EU. Now, there's a letter there we can't read properly. It's too small, but it looks like there's a breakthrough here.
Well, I'll have to. I don't follow Jean-Claude Juncker's tweets as closely as you do and other Telegraph readers. But if that's true, then that's fantastic news. I mean, as I say, I think the country wants us to move forward. They want us to coalesce around this deal. There is a real opportunity here. And I really hope members of Parliament, if we do get a deal, think carefully about what this moment represents, which is a chance to turn a page on 3.5 years of division and doubt and damage to the economy, and move forward, and a fresh start for the country. And I think a general election is desperately needed because, in the words of Geoffrey Cox, I do think this Parliament is moribund now. People are not persuading each other. Nothing's getting done. We have so much we want to achieve, and the country deserves a government that can really move us forward.
What's an ambitious programme set out last week?
Absolutely. There's some great things there, from the environment. We're doing work on housing, particularly on new homes. We're creating a new homes ombudsman, so if you get sold a shoddy house by a developer, you can take action against them and make sure you get the changes that you deserve. But everything else, the environment, and of course a big agenda on law and order, because
there's no reason why standards should fall in the environment, say. I mean, that's one of the big issues is how do we level up or level down after Brexit with the EU?
Well, I think the environment is the case in point in this question on level playing field, because it's very clear that we're going to create an environmental regime in this country that is, if anything, stronger than the one that we will inherit from our days in the EU. And so there is absolutely nothing for anyone to be worried about workers' rights, the NHS in trade deals, or indeed the environment, because we're going to be building on these standards, not diminishing them.
And Robert Jenrick, so while we've been recording this interview, Boris Johnson has been tweeting about the UK and EU have agreed a great new deal for Brexit. Now, we don't know the terms of that, but this is a line in the sand. This is a moment, isn't it, for this country after 3.5 years? I've got this nagging Brexit earache. It might go away finally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Literally an earache.
Yeah. Look, I think this is fantastic news. The country needs to move forwards. We are all sick of debating this. We've been round the houses now. It's time to move on. And if the PM has managed to secure a deal, think of all the doubters who said that he would never do this. So they said he wasn't even interested in securing a deal. If he's got a deal, now is the moment when members of Parliament of all parties need to support him and get this over the line.
That's the vote on Saturday, isn't it? There's a vote of some sort on Saturday.
Whenever the meaningful vote comes, if indeed that is on Saturday, I think MPs need to go back to their constituencies, talk to members of the public in the street, and I think what they'll hear back is, as you say, that people are sick of this now. They want to move forward, and that there's a great opportunity to be grasped so we can move on with the life of the country. And if this deal is the way to do it, let's seize that.
Robert Jenrick, Housing Secretary, on a very busy morning as news is breaking live on this podcast. Thank you for coming on Chopper's Brexit Podcast.
Thank you very much.
Well, what a morning. Now, my next guest knows more about the deal that Boris Johnson is bringing forward than most. Raoul Ruparel spent 3 years working on the Brexit talks when he was a special advisor on Brexit to Theresa May. Raoul, welcome to Chopper's Brexit Podcast in the Red Lion pub.
Thank you.
Were you here a lot drowning your sorrows when it all went wrong for Theresa May, or did you hold your head up high?
Yeah, well, I never quite came here at 10 a.m. in the morning, but there were a few nights where you had to come over here just to.
There's a smell of beer in the air, isn't it, from last night?
Yeah.
Now, this deal which Boris Johnson is trying to get over the line, it's basically based on what you wrote on the Politico website, isn't it?
Well, I think
you're the architect of this entire thing.
Well, I'm not sure I'd go that far, but there are certainly some overlaps with what I proposed. And I think these are ideas that have been knocking around the system for quite some time. There are things we looked at during the Theresa May government. There are things that have obviously come together under Boris. So there's nothing that's particularly new in terms of the type of deal he's going for. I think the big change is, that the DUP have given him a little bit more rope than they gave Theresa May to try and get this deal. But obviously this morning they've come out and said it's not acceptable yet. So that might
well change.
That could change, but it's got a very familiar feel to it. So,
yes.
I can sympathise with the people who are currently in number 10 in the negotiations, having the DUP pulling the rug out from under them.
We've all been there. When you worked for Theresa May in number 10, what did you think of the DUP?
I mean,
you and me talking. How do you describe them privately? Yeah.
No, well, look, they live up to their reputation for being very difficult negotiators, and that's to their credit, to be fair. And I spent many hours sitting with them and talking through things, but it's always very hard to judge which way they're going to go. They don't give anything away, and they only move at the very last minute. And trying to get them to commit to anything publicly and to nail them down is nigh on impossible. And look, you can understand that because that's the way negotiations in Northern Ireland work. I think it's just. When you're in negotiations in Westminster and Brussels, there are lots of different groups. Things are moving around you. I don't think it's quite the same as the environment in negotiations just in Northern Ireland.
And when you're with them in the room, does it feel transactional? I mean, people say they want money for roads and bridges, that kind of thing. Are they quite upfront, or do they sit there just not talking and you have to talk at them? Are there lots of awkward silences?
There's quite a lot of talking at them, that's true, and trying to coax them along the way. I think I don't think they're as transactional as people say, to be fair to them. Yes, they try and extract what's good for them and what they think they can get. But in the end, if you look at all the sort of final showdowns on the deal where they haven't backed the deal, it's not been about a lack of money or a lack of economic boost for Northern Ireland. It's been about the ideological principles of unionism and whether it's right for them in Northern Ireland. So to be fair to them, they've stuck to their principles rather than been transactional.
It is existential, isn't it? Anything that damages the union for them means the party won't exist anymore. They are the Democratic Unionist Party. You damage the union, you put a border down the Irish Sea, the party, what's the point of it? It's sold itself out for money, but it's lost its actual core reason to exist.
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult position for them. They're also, I think, worried about the role of the UUP and getting outflanked in terms of unionism. And I think, look, they're in a tough position because on the one hand, as you say, if they sign up to a deal that doesn't protect the union and that undermines their position more broadly, it could be, spell the end of their position and unionism more widely in Northern Ireland. Yeah. But of course, the alternatives of a no deal or an election that delivers a Conservative majority that delivers a deal that is bad for them, are also difficult. So they're in quite a tricky position right now.
This deal, then, it looks like it's basically the withdrawal agreement is about 650 pages long or so, of which 190 or so are for Northern Ireland. So basically, the deal is the same, isn't it? Apart from those 190 pages, and in those 190 pages, they're just going to let Northern Ireland be part of the UK Customs Union as well as the EU one. Is that a summary of what the deal is?
Yeah, I think there's basically two clauses or articles within a legal text that are changing. One is the customs article, which is changing to say, rather than it being a UK-wide sort of customs union, Northern Ireland will be staying in the UK customs territory, but will be applying EU customs rules at the border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And if there are differences in tariffs, you can get a rebate in Northern Ireland, allowing Northern Ireland to take part of GB free trade deals. Yeah. So that's the change in customs. And then on the exit or review or consent, they're adding in this idea that the backstop has to have broad consent in Northern Ireland.
Not called a backstop, is it?
Oh, sorry. Well, whatever it's going to be called.
That word can't be mentioned anymore.
Well, I mean,
in the new government.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it's that thing.
I tend to still call it a backstop because
it
is a backstop. Yeah. I mean, actually, it's becoming more of a front stop because actually, when you talk to people in the EU, they think we're not negotiating a backstop now. We're negotiating a permanent solution, and I'm not sure that's quite landed with people here. And that's probably another one of the DUP's concerns that not only is it something that's going to be temporary now, it's actually seen as the permanent solution to this.
So of all those pages in the withdrawal agreement that you know intimately, how many pages will change in this new deal? Just ballpark.
I mean, it's very possible that it could only be a few pages because in my view, it's only a few, as I said, two pages, two legal articles that are changing. So the rest of the
extraordinary. Why couldn't Theresa May do this?
So I think
why has all the last year happened when she could have done the same thing?
Well, I think lots of people have asked me that, given I wrote the article and said, why didn't you advise Theresa May to do this? So I have taken some flack for that. I can understand that. But I think there's a couple of important reasons why. I mean, one is that the DUP really didn't give us the leeway to do this last time. And, I think due to concern over the election, due to the risk of no deal and things,
and trust from the previous time.
And maybe trust a bit more with the current administration, then they've given Boris a bit more rope to play with, and he's had a bit more flexibility on what he can negotiate. I think the other reason is the future relationship has changed. And, Theresa May was very clear that this kind of hybrid customs was what she wanted for the entire UK.
Yeah.
Now, if you're trying to negotiate for the entire UK, that proposal, it's very hard to then say, actually, we'll negotiate it for Northern Ireland because it doesn't quite work. So for those reasons, I don't think it was really necessarily in play. Look, we looked at it, but it wasn't something we thought fitted with what the PM's aims were at the time and the political manoeuvrability we had.
Is this the best chance we're going to get at Brexit, do you think?
I think this is pretty close. I mean, it addresses some of the key concerns that, the ERG and the Brexiteers in the Conservative Party had. It allows the UK to leave. It allows it to do free trade deals from the first day after the implementation period. And if you can get the DUP on board, it protects the union in a sense. So that's going to be the key issue. I don't see where else you can really go. I mean, my understanding of the proposals in terms of consent and, democratic approval in Northern Ireland are that they're not that unreasonable. So, there's not a lot more room for manoeuvre.
Are you glad you're out of it? Or would you wish you were in arms deep delivering this deal?
I mean, it's look, it was a crazy 3 years, and it's not a sustainable way to live your life that way, if I'm honest.
You seem happier.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely much more relaxed.
The skin's better, eating better. Probably.
Less late nights in the red line, that's for sure. But I think it's good to be out, but when you do miss being in the heat of it sometimes.
And what do you think about this? If this deal might finally happen, you're one of the guys who helped deliver it. Do you feel quite proud of Brexit?
Well, look, I think I've always been of the view, and that's why I worked for the government trying to deliver Brexit. I thought after the referendum, we need to try to deliver it as best we can. And I've always felt leaving with a deal was the way to do that. And any positive influence I may have had on that is I think, a good thing in my view.
And you're consulting now, are you?
Yeah, so, trying to help businesses and the wider public understand what's going on with all of this. And it's nice to be able to have some broader conversations than being locked up in number 10 for the whole time.
Okay, Raoul Ruparel, former advisor to number 10. Thank you for coming on Choppers Brexit Podcast. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Hello, Chopper listeners. My name's Danny Boyle, and I'm the Telegraph's Commuter Editions editor, which means it's my job to provide you with great journalism that makes your journey to and from work as enjoyable as possible. I can't prevent train delays or guarantee you won't get caught in the rain, but I can make sure you're up to date with the best of the Telegraph every morning and evening. And I just wanted to let you know about one of the ways you can get all that in audio form. All you need to do is join my WhatsApp group. Every weekday, my colleague Chris Price and I bring you short audio briefings directly to your smartphone at 8 in the morning and 5:30 in the afternoon. And the best bit? It's completely free to sign up and easy. Just click on the link in the show notes for this episode. I look forward to having you as a group member soon.
Now, my next guest used to be one of the leading lights of British business, John Longworth, the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, until he resigned. And now he's a Brexit Party MEP and Chairman of Leave Means Leave. John Longworth, welcome to Choppers Brexit Podcast.
Great to be here, as ever.
Good to see you back in the pub.
Yes, indeed.
You enjoying being MEP?
Let's say I'm a reluctant MEP. I'm not really that fond of politicians, so I'm developing self-loathing now.
How do you prepare yourself when you go to Strasbourg and Brussels?
Well, a good gin and tonic is good, one of the ways to do it. But in reality, we have to recognise the fact that the European Parliament is of absolutely no relevance whatsoever in terms of power within the European Union, because all the decisions are rubber stamped before we get there. What we can do, of course, is make a noise, which then makes the EU feel very uncomfortable.
Or turn your backs on the ode to joy.
Well, I think we sort of got a bit beyond that now. We're actually turning the parliamentary auditorium into a version of the House of Commons.
Yes.
They don't know what's hit them. The president of the sessions doesn't know quite what to do with us.
What tactics are you using? Are you heckling or
a bit
are you
of heckling,
instructing?
a bit of calling out, saying when are we going to be allowed to speak? I'll give you an example. We had a 3-hour debate on, I say debate loosely, on Brexit at the last Strasbourg session, and the Brexit Party was allocated 4 minutes of speaking time, the biggest party in the European Parliament. In actual fact, when it got to the point where we had 67 Remainers speaking against 17 Leavers, we were calling out for more time to speak. We were on the list to speak. One of our members was 5th on the list, but had been overlooked, deliberately, I assume. The EU just don't want to hear anything that isn't a doffing of cap.
Do other MPs, are they pleasant to you, polite to you, or are they rude to you?
No, we get on very well, actually, with quite a number of MEPs. I actually get on very well with one of the Green Party MEPs in Yorkshire, for example. But amongst the international MEPs, it's amazing the number of French, Estonians, Germans, Italians come up to us and say, we absolutely agree with you.
Really?
And actually, during the Brexit debate, we had those nationalities standing up making very eloquent speeches in favour of Brexit.
Because it's all about democracy for you, isn't it?
Because it's very much about democracy. It's been about democracy really since after the referendum result for me. Because we've got a usurper parliament, we've got political parties that are committed to leave the European Union that are now doing a volte-face. We've got a situation where actually democracy is being undermined, and that's much more fundamentally important.
And the jailing
than
of
Brexit.
those Catalonian protesters, who tried to have a referendum against the law in Spain, just seems appalling from this standpoint. I mean, I know there are different laws as constitutional Spain, which means it rules out of order, but Just looks so heavy-handed, doesn't it?
Well, it's not a good look, for sure. And, of course, the European Union will do anything to maintain.
Now, listen, you signed a letter this week in the Telegraph, which I thought spoke for a lot of people, 280 business people there supporting the idea of Brexit. Obviously, Tim Martin at Wetherspoons is there, but also interesting people like Robert Hiscox from Hiscox PLC, Nikolai Hack, who's an AI investor. I thought that the last line was really interesting. We are an immense global power, it said. It's time to start acting like one. Is that what you would say your message is to the government? Just get past this blockage and start grasping the opportunity of Brexit?
Well, if only they could get past the blockage, it would be a marvellous thing. The opportunities economically of Brexit are legion, and Britain will do extremely well, providing the government has the freedom to act, which is why the European Union are trying to shackle us and prevent us from having that freedom.
What's your view on this deal? It's not changing a lot from Theresa May's deal. I think there's a bit of extra leeway for Northern Ireland to be part of our UK customs union, but that's about it.
Well, we're getting lots of rumours, of course, but we don't actually know what the deal content is.
So until Thursday morning, not clear.
Exactly. Until the content's clear, it's very difficult to comment particularly. But what I would say is this: provided a lock on us leaving is removed and the direction of travel is for the Great Britain to leave the customs union, the single market and the European Court of Justice jurisdiction, then I think the deal will be tolerable.
I don't think it's those things, though. I mean, we'll come on to what that means for the incoming election. Yeah. You wrote a piece this week called Two Irish Borders May Be the Necessary Sacrifice for the Brexit We Leavers Need for the Telegraph. Can you explain what that's about? Why you worried about two Irish borders?
Well, it was quite a controversial article. It had been proposed, of course, that there be balance in the customs, or certainly the single market arrangements for Northern Ireland, but it may also include the customs arrangements, whereby there's a border between the north and the south, and also between the north and the rest of the UK. I think the DUP were probably reasonably okay with that because it was balanced. The truth of the matter is that it's absolutely essential that Great Britain leaves the European Union at any cost. Once we're out, the gravitational pull provided by the booming UK economic situation will drag Northern Ireland out. It may even drag the Republic of Ireland out eventually. So I'm very much a believer that even if we have to leave Northern Ireland in stasis for a while, provided they're not locked in forever, they will leave with us.
Do you think Brexit might mean that Ireland comes back into the UK? Is that what you just said then?
Not back into the UK, but the Republic of Ireland may, in the fullness of time, choose to have a closer relationship with the rest of the UK.
Join the UK's customs union rather than the EU one, or be in
who knows
be in
what
two
future
systems.
History holds.
Okay.
But as the EU declines and the UK booms, the dynamic will change.
Well, you heard it here first, listeners. Now, just briefly, you mentioned there European Court of Justice jurisdiction and the bill, both of which will be part of this deal as we understand it. Yeah. Does that mean that you'll fight the election on saying this deal is a cop-out, isn't actually Brexit, as the Brexit Party?
It depends entirely what the content of the deal is, and I can't speak for the Brexit Party's position on this until we're absolutely clear, and of course until an election is over the horizon. As chairman of Leave Means Leave, I can be absolutely clear that if this deal is not good, then Leave Means Leave will reboot and campaign again. And that's a cross-party group, including all the Leave parties.
Fact you may damage the Tory party, the only party which has a realistic chance of getting a Brexit that you might even a bit agree with, because you're risking letting Jeremy Corbyn come in.
But the other side of the coin is that if this deal is acceptable, maybe not the best one we would have wanted, then Leave Means Leave will campaign for it.
John Longworth, former Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, Brexit Party MEP, Chairman of Leave Means Leave. Thank you for coming on Chopper's Brexit Podcast.
Thank you.
Now, amid all the Brexit chaos, we've had a hefty dose of British pomp and circumstance this week when a Queen came from the Buckingham Palace in her golden coach to Parliament to open it. It's one of the more visible ways in which the Queen interacts in politics. Although it should be said it's the government, not the Queen, who writes that speech, but more of that later. And here to tell me more about the politics of the royal family is former Lib Dem MP and the Minister in the coalition government, Norman Baker. Norman, welcome to Red Lion Pub.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Are you a familiar denizen of these premises?
More downstairs than up here, has to be said.
So you spent your time writing this book called "And What Do You Do?", which of course is
what do you do?
Yes, and what do you do is how you say it. That's what the Queen says to everybody when she meets them in a freshly painted room, of course, whenever she goes anywhere in the country. It's a really, really good book. I've written an endorsement on the back of it because I liked it so much. I think it's a fair, clear-eyed view of the royal family and what they're up to and how they maybe not get enough scrutiny as you might like.
That's right. In
this country. What do you find out about their politics? Do you think the Queen really is a Brexiteer?
Well, I think the version of events which she gave to Nick Clegg at that famous lunch, and which was supported by BBC journalists, suggests that she does think we should leave the European Union.
Did you ask Nick Clegg about that lunch?
Nick was rather reluctant to talk about it when I put it to him.
What did the Queen say again? Do you remember?
Why can't we just get on with it, I think was roughly what she said.
She speaks for the country.
Well, I mean, it may be so, except, of course, even if we have Brexit, then it's not the end of it. People think it's the end of it. There's then years and years of negotiations about trade deals and everything else. So it isn't going to go away, whatever happens.
Well, fish is the dog that hasn't barked in Brexit, as far as I'm concerned.
Fish?
Fishing rights. Yeah.
Oh, I see, you're right. Well, fish don't bark normally.
Well, I know.
Is that unless a dogfish, perhaps?
I'm mixing my metaphors. But are they generally Tories? Are they Lib Dems?
I think they're basically Tory, but that's not. That's inevitable. I mean, they come from that privileged background. They've got lots of money. They've got the landed people. I mean, anyone in that situation is probably going to be Tory rather than anything else.
They've got a big stake in the country, haven't they?
It's not surprising. I mean, the Queen has tried, I think, over her period in office, dare I say, to be neutral. She's tried to get on, I think, with prime ministers of both parties. So I think she's tried to be scrupulously neutral. But having said that, you can't deny your background and the way you've been brought up. She'd never lived in a house without servants.
Nor have I, actually. No, I haven't.
And they've been private educated, they've got private healthcare and so on. So it's pretty likely they are Tories.
Were you intrigued by the Queen's speech this week when the Queen said, the policy of my government has been to leave the EU? That's in the Queen's speech. And then in the same executive summary, the government said Britain is leaving. Now, I think that's really that. I read a piece about it for the Telegraph. I thought that language was so interesting that the Queen doesn't want to embrace Brexit in case it won't happen.
Well, just to read out the speech she's given, of course.
Yeah, that's negotiated, the language, isn't it?
The language is negotiated. That's perfectly true. However, I remember when the Queen was reading out the speech about the House of Lords hereditaries going, and basically, my government will take away the hereditary principle. Hang on, that's not right. So she has to sit there. I felt sorry for the Queen this week, actually. This is an election gimmick. I mean, she was rolled out to be an election asset for the Prime Minister, and I don't really think it's appropriate to use a Queen in that way.
Let's move on from that. But you met her a few times, didn't you?
Yes.
Would you like your book? Mr. Baker.
I doubt it. I doubt it because...
You're a Privy Councillor, weren't you? Or you still are,
I'm a Privy Councillor, yes. I mean, the basic point is that the way the royal family's operated over well over 100 years has been to project the image they wish to project and to try and keep quiet that which they find embarrassing or difficult. And everybody would like to do that. I'm sure politicians would like to do that. But there's a danger in doing that, because if you end up behaving in a way which is inappropriate and which the public at large wouldn't like, and you think you can get away with it by covering it up, what's that remind you of? MPs' expenses, because that's what MPs did. MPs were busy spending money on moats and clearing ivy off and duck houses and everything else because they thought people wouldn't find out. And I'm afraid it's the same with the royal family. There are excesses there which, if the public knew about them, they wouldn't be very happy about them.
You're one of the few MPs, having covered that scandal, you're one of the few MPs who called that behaviour out very early on. I remember you put in a claim for bicycling miles to show the ludicrousness of the scheme, didn't you?
Yes, I put a claim in for... I tried to save money, actually. I tried to save money by using a bicycle rather than a taxi and everything else. They wouldn't allow me a bicycle. And then I tried to claim for a laptop for the flat. So they basically wanted to do some work. And I did so deliberately because they told me I could only claim for something that wasn't related to work. How absurd.
You're an absolute hero of that, having been through it, covering it. But, so there's a reckoning coming for the royal family, do you think? And this is why this book's so important, because it's holding a mirror up to their behaviour, saying,
yes,
if you don't address this behaviour,
yes,
there will be a problem at some point in the future.
I think there is. I mean, the conclusion of the book is that people ought to be moving towards a European monarchy, really. The Dutch, the Belgians, the Norwegians.
How's that different to our
It's
monarchy?
very different. I mean, we're the last imperial monarchy. We are the monarchy a bit like the French, the Germans and the Russians, which all went in 1918 or beforehand. And the monarchies which are left are not, they are modern monarchies. Ours isn't.
Because ours has notionally has power. Is that what you mean?
Well, not just that. It's got centuries of tradition from being a primary European power. And although our position in the world has changed, the royal family continues to operate as if
Isn't it our
nothing has
best
changed.
asset, though, when you look at the way Harry and Meghan have been travelling around Africa? We've got William and Kate in Pakistan.
Well, they're
Everyone's going mad about them.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. That's a very useful aspect for the country, and they are ambassadors when used properly. They can be an asset to the country. That's perfectly true. But there is an unfortunate underneath which needs to be sorted out. And, this book will not be welcomed by the royal family, but actually they ought to embrace it, because if they were to embrace the changes necessary, that would put them in a better position to go forward in the future.
You've also diminished them by your account.
I don't
weaken
diminish
their
them.
power and influence.
Diminish them? I don't think it diminishes them. I mean, the fact that I was in Sweden, and when I was just an ordinary MP, and I was at this event, and I got chatting to this woman. 10 minutes into the conversation, I found out she was a member of the Swedish royal family. You can't imagine that sort of thing happening.
Did you bow immediately?
No, because that's not the way it works over there. Queen Juliana, I think it was, in the Netherlands, she used to go out shopping in the local shops and say hello to people. There's a different culture.
But don't we like it that they're being a bit different? Don't we like that idea?
Well, I think there's different and there's different. Different is okay. If you want the pomp and circumstance every now and then, that's fine. But if that is then used to generate tax evasion and tax avoidance, if it's used to generate, frankly, ripping off the public purse. If the legal system is tweaked to help you, for example, legal wills aren't published. Charles's...
the Queen pays tax. I mean, let's not go into too much. The Queen pays income tax.
She voluntarily pays tax, but she doesn't pay all the tax she should do.
On what?
Queen, well, I mean, for example, when the Queen Mother died, there was no inheritance money paid. The Queen didn't pay £25 million in death duties, which anyone else would have paid in this country.
And the will was sealed as well.
And the will was sealed. You've got to look at... And there's also an issue as to whether what was given to individual members of the royal family are private gifts or public gifts. You know how it is with MPs, Chris. I mean, if you get something, you have to declare it, and it's all open and
over £300 or something, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
For ministers,
it's I think it's £600 for a visit, and from it used to be anyway. But I mean, Prince Charles, for example, was given an Aston Martin by... Yeah, and was he given that in a personal capacity, or was he given it because he was there representing
it's all fudged.
This country? And the answer is they keep them. They keep the gifts themselves. And in a way, MPs couldn't do that.
Norman Baker, have you sent your book to the royal family?
Have I taken it to them?
Have you sent it to them?
No, and I can buy it like anybody else.
Norman Baker's book, And What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know, is out now in all good bookshops. Norman, thank you for coming again on Choppers
You're very
Brexit
welcome.
Podcast. Thank you. Well, thanks to all my guests this week on Choppers Brexit Podcast. Norman Baker, of course, Robert Jenrick, Raoul Ruparel, and of course, John Longworth. Thank you to the podcast producers, Theo Luludis, Elliot Lampitt, Andy McKenzie, and our superfan this week, Isla Robertson. And thank you to you, most importantly, for listening. If you're enjoying the show, please join the 367 listeners who have left us ratings on Apple Podcasts. Please give us 5 stars and tell your friends about it, tweet about it, pass on the beauty and glory of the podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Brexit Broadcast or email us choppersbrexitpodcast@telegraph.co.uk. And if you're nice, we'll reply to you. And don't forget, as a valued podcast listener, you can get 30 days free access to the Telegraph's website, completely free of charge. Just go to telegraph.co.uk/chopper to read John Longworth and other voices you've heard on this podcast, free of charge for a month. And finally, always buy your copy of the Daily Telegraph. It's brilliant. Until next time, cheerio!
Do you have a friend who never pays their share of the bill? Or are your parents wasting your inheritance on flash cars and Caribbean cruises? Or maybe you have 2 children, but you can only afford to send one to a fee-paying school.
The common thread? Money, and the moral problems that it so often leaves in its wake.
I'm Lauren Davidson.
And I'm Sam Meadows.
We both report on personal finance for The Telegraph. And each week on our podcast, Moral Money, we're joined by one of our paper's best-loved columnists to unpick the thorny financial issues sent in by listeners.
From stretching your work expenses to the ethics of paying less tax, this is the ultimate guide to what's okay and what's not in the blurred world of money morals.
It's heated.
It's lively.
And it might even help you become a better person.
Search for Moral Money in your favourite podcast app and click subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode.